In the quiet halls of academia, long before the desert burned with artificial suns, a man walked with the weight of galaxies in his mind. His name was J. Robert Oppenheimer, a man too brilliant for his time and too human for what destiny demanded of him. Born in 1904 in New York City, Oppenheimer was the kind of soul who could see beauty in equations and terror in possibility. He was a poet in a world of physicists, a philosopher trapped in the machinery of war. No one yet knew that this man would soon give birth to the weapon that could erase humanity itself. When World War II ignited, the world trembled beneath Hitler's shadow. In 1939, news arrived that German scientists had split the atom, unlocking a secret hidden since the dawn of the universe. It wasn't just a scientific achievement, it was the key to unimaginable power. Albert Einstein himself signed a letter to President Roosevelt warning that Nazi Germany could build a bomb unlike any the world had ever seen. The United States had no choice but to act. The race for the atomic bomb had begun. In a quiet office, under flickering lamps and cigarette smoke, the greatest scientific minds of America gathered. It was a mission cloaked in secrecy, fueled by fear and urgency, the Manhattan Project. And at its heart stood Oppenheimer, chosen not just for his genius, but for his ability to unite minds that were otherwise impossible to control. He became the conductor of the most dangerous orchestra in history. They built a secret city in the New Mexico desert, Los Alamos, a place that didn't exist on any map. Behind barbed wire and military patrols, thousands worked without knowing what they were building. Engineers, soldiers, scientists, and families lived in silence, surrounded by secrets. Only a handful of men, Oppenheimer among them, understood the true purpose of their creation. Every calculation brought them closer to the unthinkable, a weapon that could mimic the power of the sun. But Oppenheimer was not like the others. As the theories took shape and uranium turned into fire, something in him began to break. He knew what they were doing. He knew this weapon would change everything, not just the war, but the future of mankind. And yet, he pressed on. Because the fear of Hitler's bomb was greater than his conscience. Night after night, he stood under the cold desert sky, staring into the void, asking himself if humanity was ready for the power of gods. By 1945, after years of sleepless nights and relentless work, they had done it. The weapon was ready. The world's first atomic bomb, nicknamed the Gadget, stood silent in the heart of the desert, waiting to awaken. They called the test Trinity. And as the countdown began, the air felt heavier, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. Scientists stood miles away, eyes hidden behind dark lenses, hearts trembling. And when the clock hit zero, the desert turned to day. A blinding light tore through the sky, brighter than 1,000 suns. The ground shook, mountains echoed, and a mushroom cloud rose higher than fear itself. As the fire faded and silence returned, Oppenheimer whispered the words that would haunt history forever. "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." It was done. Mankind had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed.
The desert had gone quiet, but the world would never be the same again. The scientists of Los Alamos celebrated, some in awe, others in tears. They had unleashed a new kind of power, something so vast, so terrifying, that even they didn't understand its full reach. For Oppenheimer, there was no victory, only silence. As the mushroom cloud faded into the heavens, he knew they had not just split the atom, they had split history itself. But Washington had no time for reflection. The war in Europe was over, Yet Japan refused to surrender. And so, in secret meetings, men in uniforms and suits decided the fate of thousands, maybe millions. President Truman authorized the use of the atomic bomb. The scientists who built it watched from afar, powerless to stop what was coming. Their creation was about to be tested on human life. August 6, 1945, a clear morning over Japan. The people of Hiroshima went about their day. Children walking to school, workers on bicycles, merchants opening their shops. None of them knew that above the clouds, at 31,000 feet, a silver B-29 bomber named Enola Gay carried a bomb called Little Boy. Inside that bomb was the condensed fury of the universe, the same energy that powers the stars, now aimed at a city of civilians. At 8:15 a.m., the bay doors opened. The bomb fell silently for 43 seconds. Then the world ended. A blinding flash erased everything within seconds. Concrete melted. Shadows burned into walls. Tens of thousands vanished in an instant, their bodies reduced to outlines of light. The blast wave rolled through the city like the breath of hell itself. Those who survived the first seconds screamed as fire consumed the ruins. Hiroshima was gone. 3 days later, another bomb, Fat Man, fell on Nagasaki. The second sun rose, and with it another city vanished. Over 200,000 lives were taken in less than a week. Japan surrendered. The war was over. But Oppenheimer felt no triumph. The victory was heavy, poisoned with guilt. The weapon meant to end all wars had instead revealed the darkest part of humanity, the desire to control even death itself. When Oppenheimer walked into the White House to meet President Truman, he didn't look like a hero. He looked like a man haunted by his own shadow. He told Truman, "Mr. President, I feel I have blood on my hands." Truman, irritated, handed him a handkerchief and said, "Well, it won't come off." The scientist who once commanded armies of physicists now stood alone, a broken prophet in a world that worshipped his creation. Back in Los Alamos, the labs grew silent. The scientists dispersed, their purpose complete, their souls heavy. Oppenheimer withdrew into silence. The fire he had summoned was now beyond his control, no longer a scientific experiment, but a weapon of politics and power. Nations raced to build bigger bombs, deadlier devices. The Cold War began, and with it came an age of fear, sirens, bunkers, and the eternal shadow of nuclear annihilation. Oppenheimer watched from afar as the weapon he birthed grew into a monster no one could stop. Each new test, each rising mushroom cloud, was another echo of that first flash in the desert. He spoke out, warning the world of what was coming, an arms race that could end in the extinction of humanity. But the same government that once hailed him as a genius now saw him as a threat. The father of the atomic bomb was now labeled a traitor. He was stripped of his security clearance, humiliated in front of the very people who once called him their leader. His name was erased from the future of American science. He had become a ghost, not just in the halls of power, but in the conscience of the world. Yet deep inside, Oppenheimer carried a truth that no one could take away, that knowledge without wisdom is destruction, and power without morality is death. As he stood by the sea years later, watching the waves crash endlessly against the shore, he thought of the desert, the light, the sound, the silence that followed. He had given humanity the tools of gods, but not the heart to use them wisely. And for the rest of his life, he carried that burden alone.
Years passed, but the echo of that explosion never left him. For the rest of his life, J. Robert Oppenheimer lived in the long shadow of Trinity, the place where he had stolen fire from the gods and given it to men. He was no longer the confident scientist of Los Alamos. He had become something else, a man consumed by remorse, standing between science and sin. The brilliance that once inspired awe now carried the weight of guilt, and in his silence, the world kept building more fire. By the 1950s, the Cold War was spiraling into madness. The United States and the Soviet Union began creating weapons even more powerful than the ones that had ended World War II. Hydrogen bombs, capable of wiping out cities in seconds. Oppenheimer, terrified by what he had set in motion, tried to speak out. He urged restraint. He warns that if nations continued down this path, they would destroy not just each other, but the entire human race. But the America of the 1950s was not a place for conscience. It was a place of fear, of spies, communists, and invisible enemies. And in that fear, Oppenheimer became a target. The same government that had once protected his secrets now tore through his life searching for betrayal. They accused him of having ties to communism, of being untrustworthy, of standing against the nation's defense. In 1954, they put him on trial, not for crimes of espionage, but for daring to question power. It was a slow execution of reputation. Behind closed doors, in rooms filled with suspicion and smoke, the man who had built the atomic bomb was stripped of his security clearance. The verdict was clear. Oppenheimer was no longer welcome in the world he helped create. When the decision was announced, he didn't argue. He didn't protest. He simply said, the whole thing was a farce. He withdrew to the island of Princeton, far from the noise of politics and ambition. There, among books, storms, and silence, he tried to find peace. But peace never came easily to a man who had seen the sky burn. Sometimes he would walk along the shore, eyes fixed on the horizon, as if he were waiting for something, a sign, an answer, or maybe forgiveness. Those who met him in those final years described him as distant, kind, but haunted, a man who had glimpsed eternity and could never return. And yet, despite his fall from grace, Oppenheimer's name never vanished. To some, he was a hero, the man who ended a brutal war and saved countless lives by forcing Japan to surrender. To others, he was a destroyer, the man who opened the door to nuclear terror. But to himself, he was something else entirely, a warning. A reminder that knowledge can be both salvation and damnation, depending on the hands that hold it. In 1963, President Lyndon Johnson tried to offer him redemption, the Enrico Fermi Award, America's highest scientific honor. Oppenheimer accepted it quietly, his thin smile hiding the storm beneath. He knew that no medal could undo what had been done. The world still lived under the shadow of his creation, nations pointing bombs at one another, each second a silent countdown to potential extinction. In his final years, as his body weakened, he often quoted poetry and scripture. The line that had escaped his lips on the day of the Trinity test followed him until the end. Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. But those words weren't just prophecy. They were confession. Because Oppenheimer had realized something deeper than anyone around him, that humanity's greatest danger was not the bomb itself, but the human heart that would choose to use it.